As a young kid, I studied the unknown on the internet. Sacred geometries, Metatron's cube, the flower of life, the world soul. You know all that when you're a kid. You know you want to try and understand the world, try and find your place in it. People love to tell you your place in it, but isn't that just for them?
In this video, I am not going to show any FNAF imagery because I find it too scary. Despite this, in speaking here about the fact that FNAF's imagery frightens me, I face down the fact that engagement with FNAF and the FNAF fan base, or at least like faces of it, the faces that I engage with, has emerged as a periodic compulsion in my life. My body rebels, regrettably. With that said, here are some FNAF related thoughts.
Rock your body rock your body like a cattle plague.
To begin with, I generally don't like FNAF, both because it's too spooky and because there's some elements of FNAF as a text that put me off. What it is that I find frightful about FNAF has changed over the years. My distaste, though, has generally remained the same. Even now, I remember how the first MatPat/game theory video on FNAF rocked my body like a cattle plague when it came out, when I watched it. This was the video about how here was this game that, if you squinted, looked like it mapped onto some murders that happened at a Chuck E. Cheese back in the 80s or 90s or something. I was really terrified. I consulted my therapist about my fear, but I was too ashamed to be honest about what it was I was afraid of. So I didn't. So I wasn't. Later, I showed the video to a friend at a sleepover. I felt like my friend needed to see it. I wanted him to see it. When the video started playing on his phone, though, my fear returned and I had to leave the room. Outside in the lit hallway, I held the door shut, waiting for when there was MatPat's catchphrase, "Oh, it's just a theory," waiting for when it'd be safe to hang out with my friend again. My friend was confused why I insisted he watch the video. It was fine, I guess, was his reaction. I continued to keep up with FNAF and the game theory videos on it throughout middle school and high school. Engagement was always accompanied by horror, though. In between the 7th and 8th grade, my family moved from the city to the suburbs to accommodate my dad's job. Here, my fear because of FNAF, my FNAF-related fear, escalated almost exponentially. I hated this new house and this new neighborhood. Both were structured by that truly American lineage that is white supremacy. White flight, plantations, the arrival of the settler. The settler abducts land and tells himself he must abduct more, and then the abducted land starts to lose, or is imagined to lose, its Edenic glow. That is implicit to the new space I was living in. Was a founding context of murder and an organizing system of colonial violence. My house choked me to sleep every night. Here's a poem I wrote called This House 1. This house has an odor, a stench, some kind of putrid platitude that coats its walls. Its pallid frames form a palindrome, the color of carcassed human bones. And beneath the sheets there's a telltale cry, the thumping of a heart, where waspy shouts of furnaces were carried from the start. I don't remember when it started, but I have vivid memories of seeing animatronic characters manifested in my house's shadows. In the awful basement with its shoddily built staircase of protruding nails. In my misshapen closet with its piles of texturally discomfortable and trying to be forgotten masculine gendered clothing. In the bathroom, what adjoined my bedroom, with its door that could not shut, and its stained association with my masturbatory shame. In the hallway next to my room, with its door that swung open by itself every night as the ventilation circulated the house. I was suicidal and depressed, etc. at the time, and I saw the things that I feared appear in the things that I hated come to kill me. I have almost never been able to distinguish dream from reality. And thus I remember what it feels like to have my stomach sliced open or caved in by animatronic. The scooper thing is an especially vivid memory. I feel the evisceration and I writhe. And yet I can't stop watching FNAF videos. I know it's self-harm. That's why I did it. It let me make sense of the world. It made the pain and violence and oppression of this wretched, evil state miraculously gain form. The thing that I appreciate most about FNAF, and what I find most remarkable about it, right, as well as other horror popular culture, other franchises of horror popular culture, such as the Saw series of movies. This thing is also one of the main things that it seems like the fandom and the games are working to undo, working against. That is, FNAF is non-linear. In part, FNAF's non-linear temporality is an effect of its placement in the horror genre. Nonlinearity and a status quo which is constantly agitated, complicated, contested, queered are features I associate with horror. By FNAF's nonlinearity, I refer to a few things. The first is that plural endings have been key elements of the series since FNAF 3, maybe earlier, I don't know. The second is that within a given game, game action does not always proceed chronologically. And then lastly is that games are not released in chronological order. The question of endings and closure in the series is relevant to this, and I touch on that in the next section. Especially within the first few entries of the series, the question, when does this game even take place? Was a really centralizing point of discussion within the community and fandom. What a shock it was when the sequel to FNAF, FNAF 2, was in fact a prequel game. This, despite the fact that the animatronics in FNAF 2, the new game, despite the fact they look new, and yet It was not so. It was the prequel. It was the game that came before. The conceits of style and aesthetic prove only too misleading. Shiny is not an inherent signifier of chronological recency. Elsewhere, the secret minigames in games like FNAF 3 place players back in time, as it were, while still maintaining the mechanics of this is a game. That is, players continue to be able to press buttons and click the screen or whatever and have what it is on the screen react to that change. The games announce themselves as generally going forward in historical time, yet they never inhabit it in a fully ordered way. The time that they inhabit is never fully ordered. If the world of FNAF is said to operate on causality, the sequencing of these causes and effects is not guaranteed. Sometimes a jump scare causes a game over screen. That is, a cause creates an effect then and there. Other times, a particle of the world will sit inert for years and years, till one day an errant cause, a wandering cause, comes along and announces that with its entry, this hitherto inert particle is thus transformed into an effect. What I'm saying is that basically somewhere in the future, the past changed. What I'm not saying is that the past was always existing as what the future would go on to reveal it to be. Causality that works backwards. In a sense, this is the concept of a prequel, I suppose. Later games re-endow the former ones with meaning. The complications and contestations continue. A question can be, how much of this phenomenon equates to the series retconning itself? Does retconning invalidate something's legitimacy? I would say probably not. I also don't think it matters that much. Since I don't view FNAF as being ordered by a grand design, reordering it doesn't upset me per se.
And everything continues, just like everything does, just like pain, just like love.
In addition to fixed causal linearity, FNAF also resists, with ready anger, the violence of endings. Even if it says otherwise, even if it promises otherwise, even if fans work to make it otherwise. My term violence of endings refers to the concept that the idea of something ending holds an implicit violence in its logic. An example is how the narrative that COVID is over, that is, that it ended in 2022 or 2023 or whenever, this narrative is violent both in that it contradicts the continuing existence of the virus's infection and death numbers, fatality numbers or whatever, and that in doing so, in contradicting these numbers, the narrative endangers communities who are vulnerable to the virus because of immunocompromising or other reasons. Statistically, these are poor communities, black communities, indigenous communities, among others. Communities that are already marginalized by the institution of America. Continuing, I read FNAF, the permeable entity that it is, as wholly disaligned with the prevailing logic of the organization of historical time. That is the logic of modernity and progress. In other words, I read FNAF as, despite the facts of Scott Cawthon's religious background, some say this is important, some say it is not within the fandom. Despite this, I read FNAF as being resistant to the logic of apocalypse. Pointing to the obvious, the game is called Five Nights at Freddy's. And yet the first game, even the first game in the series, this temporal bounding box, Five Nights, was not the end. Not enough to contain it. Yes, I'm choosing to disregard that maybe technically only the first Five Nights count from some kind of lore perspective. There have always been remainders in the world of FNAF. Not to be confused with FNAF World, though I suppose it holds true there too. There has never been a totalizing the end in the series that hasn't later been overturned. This extends to the mechanics of the diegesis, the fictional world of FNAF, as well, wherein neither death of the corpse, nor gravestone, nor funeral, nor any kind of sign of memorialization are ever truly final. Beings persist despite it all. Good persists, evil persists. The crisis is primordial, played out against time and pastiche and flesh and blood and oil and machine and remnant and agony. William Afton's catchphrase is corny. Yes, but it also succinctly encapsulates the truth of what this series is about. I always come back. The unendingness, the eternal coming back, that serves as the series' engine is also that which sends its fandom, and the games too, kind of, reeling in terror as they try to obscure it and make it as if it were not so. What is the true ending? What is the real timeline? How do we solve the game, the lore? I have not traced my feelings on this matter, fandom theorization tendencies, vis-a-vis solving, to their logical end, but I feel as though they implicate something crucial. Thus, but in this way, it is not even settled. I have not been able to settle my feelings on the matter, that it is not settled. I feel that it is not settled, and yet this too is not settled. And yet, nevertheless, the urge to settle it persists. It is a collision of both and with neither nor.
People always say that we'll figure it out, but everything just keeps piling on us. Economy, size, blood, bigger than God. We'll just solve 10,000 years of problems.
While preparing this video, I saw several people hostile towards theorizations that used FNAF books, or, for example, non-mainline games, as means of solving a given piece of the FNAF riddle. The reactions I encountered, which could be non-representative, indicated that some fans not only didn't care about the books, but also felt that caring about the books was a bad, even disqualifying action to take. I could be missing something, but I interpret this perspective as a bad faith interaction with FNAF theorization, and FNAF fandom. To me, this point of view is saying, I see there is evidence, an object that is announcing itself with the intention to order the universe that I'm researching, and I will reject you, and I will reject those who move through you. I will operate as unevidenced in spite of the fact that I am here saying that I am trying to find evidence and order it. But after I sat with it, I think this too is kind of a bad faith interpretation of this extreme perspective, of this anti-book perspective. Objectivity isn't actually the object of their fascination. Even though anti-book and other FNAF theorizations use language and signs that historically suggest objectivity. Their projects often turn out to be relatively personal in scale, rather than a path at organizing the universe. At the highest level, FNAF theorization is about arranging space within fandom. This method has proved historically potent as a means to get clout, could be one reason. Community is a goal. At lower levels, it is about flexing the self or sharing a headcanon. The text of FNAF is rather limpid in terms of saying what it is about, saying what it is even about, right? Even some of the simpler things that are confirmed, quote unquote, are not present at a literal logical level of the text. Logic here is to suggest methods of strictly syllogism, etc. No inferences. Most theorizations are narrativizations, and often narrativization that move through the self as orator, thus interring onto the self an auto-narrativization. In a word, for FNAF, theory is an ideology, and therefore a technology. How do I make sense of this? FNAF, for me, is the question of theory. Not how do I make sense of FNAF objectively, independent from biased observers. Anti-book theorizations are not actually bad faith because this me is defined autonomously and as independent from FNAF literature. And this is the narrative produced by these selves, for these selves. Most of the violence FNAF features is non-representative of how violence manifests in the world I live in. Most, I guess, FNAF violence, such as the missing children's incident, is essentially synonymous with the distorted violence of true crime podcasts. Child kidnappers exist, yes, but they're more often agitated family members than immortal serial killers. Child murderers exist, yes, but they usually look less like Matthew Lillard and more like a drone operator or the American president. Read war criminals in both of these cases, of who I'm saying are actual child killers. Another example that informs my impression that FNAF's violence is non-representative is the similarities between the violence of FNAF and Pizzagate. Although Pizzagate occurred 2 years after, or however long, after the first FNAF game came out, the conspiracy logic that motivated it resembles elements of FNAF. Rather than corrupt elite harvesting adrenochrome from children to extend their lives, this is Pizzagate, FNAF has a corrupt business owner harvesting souls then remnant then agony from children to extend his life. Rather than supposing that there is a basement in a pizza restaurant where dungeons of children are being held for future mutilation, that is Pizzagate, FNAF has a secret rooms in the walls and basement, I don't know the full lore, of a pizza restaurant where murdered children are hidden from the authorities and torture machines are stored. My intention in drawing this comparison is that, at the very least, FNAF resembles schizophrenic thought patterns. The world of FNAF incentivizes conspiracy, especially of a kind which obscures violences occurring elsewhere. I'm talking about Pizzagate, which I didn't clarify before, is indicative of QAnon, etc. To be clear, I'm not intending to say that schizophrenic thought patterns are bad. I feel pareidolia, paranoia, etc. are important and can very well be productive. However, the schizophrenia that this series is prone to is a kind which makes virtual fictional dead children of more imminent need of intention and willpower and concern than the actual children who are currently alive in the world that I live in. An example is Gaza and Palestine, where children are hunted and murdered by a genocidal state. FNAF emphasizes the individual. The mythic figures of William Afton and Michael Afton and Elizabeth Afton and whoever Afton, I don't really know the lore. This is a series basically about one family and plus the people they've implicated in their murders. This is a story that obscures systems.
I'm just me without a soul, without a brain, without anything, and anymore. I'm just me without a soul, without a brain, without anything, and anymore. I have no spirit everlasting.
While I retain that FNAF focuses on the myth of the individual as heroic and causative of change, the shifts in the series since its beginning are worth noting. The movement away from souls, I think, which were one soul equals one animatronic, to Remnant, which was basically the same, but maybe not, I don't know the lore, to now Agony, which is industrial and dislinked from a one-to-one for sure, is an example. This and that the series moved away from Afton, spanning Aftons everywhere, to focusing on other people whose lives have intersected with the monolithic Afton saga. This marks a movement towards addressing systemic and socially accrued trauma and violence, etc. William Afton is evil, yes, but his violence does not exist in isolation. It is enabled by a system of capitalism, chiefly. Even when dealing with evil men, to suggest that they are uniquely villainous obscures the circumstances they are inscribed within. To enact restoration and act against replication, it is imperative to imagine against William Afton as the singular man who makes history.
Even if you kill all my dreams, I still see by the dawn outside. Staring out through the glass at the world like watching TV. Now I know I don't hate myself anymore. I just can't protect her. And as time covers everything that I used to be, a new world that I can't even imagine breathes.
When I trace the origins and contexts of violence in FNAF, the root is usually situated in capitalist technologies and machines. Therefore, I interpret FNAF as illustrating how capital organized structures, especially capitalist entries like companies or franchises, incentivize and produce violence. To return to William Afton, the main serial killer of the franchise, he is the main named capitalist behind Fazbear Entertainment. Whether it be when it was an Inc. or an LLC, I think. His access to and control of capital is what enables him to murder children without immediate recourse. This is illustrative of how capital organized structures create power imbalances between CEOs and workers, as well as consumers. Imbalances of this type enable power to predate on the disempowered, of which children are an especially disempowered population, though the disempowerment of children is probably more attributable to systems such as patriarchy than it is to capitalism. The opening sequence of the first Help Wanted game demonstrates other aspects of how capital is linked to violence in FNAF. The narrator explains that the Fazbear Entertainment Corporation, or whatever, uses its capital to cover up its foundational atrocities, such as by commissioning propagandistic art. The FNAF movie offers another example. Here, William Afton takes advantage of the fact that capital-organized systems require people to have jobs or else kill them, or else capitalism will kill them. He intentionally hires economically vulnerable and thus disempowered people to work as security guards, whereupon he ritualistically slaughters them. This capitalist incentivized logic of cost-cutting and penny-pinching is used throughout the series by agents of power to streamline their violent operations. I mean this as well in the sense that because penny-pinching logic is so normalized within capitalism, both in FNAF and the world that I live in, capital owners in FNAF can cut corners with the intentions of using those cut corners to commit violence, while at the same time running to the justification that they were only doing what capitalism was asking them to do. That their goal was just profit maximization, not violence. How were they supposed to know that violence would secrete from the walls of the buildings they built? If not clear, I mean to suggest that the guise of normalized capitalism is used as a disingenuous obscurant for practices of intentional malice. Aside from capitalism, other organizing structures also empower and enable William Afton to murder children. Namely, structures like patriarchy and white supremacy. I move to patriarchy in the next section, but I won't touch upon white supremacy in this video.
What does it really take to want to hurt a child? It seems like it's not much for a lot of people.
Outside of pizzerias and capitalist milieus, the Afton family is the series' most frequent site of violence. The Afton family. Murder and abuse occur within the family, not just the Afton family, because of the family structure. Because of this, I read FNAF as, perhaps inadvertently, advocating for family abolition. Family abolition posits that because family is so often a primary site of violence for its members, it is imperative to dismantle the nuclear family and other families that resemble it. In place of a family, family abolition incentivizes other social relationships with the goal of reducing atomization. The logic is that once the centralized normative social pattern of the family, with its preponderance for violence, is destabilized, people will have a wider variety of social dynamics to occupy and spend time within. I say that FNAF advocates for family abolition in that the families within FNAF are cosmically unable to not produce violence upon their members. This is eminently true for the main Afton and Emily families. And it also extends to many of the other families that appear in FNAF. Although I haven't read the FNAF books myself, my hearsay understanding is that almost all the stories contain, in the most generous terms, dysfunctional families. To come out with it, more than for it to be just a coincidence, parents in the books and in FNAF directly or indirectly kill their children. Sure, some parents try to make it up by making robot versions of their dead kids, but a dead kid is a dead kid. By indirectly kill, I mean parental actions such as negligence and abuse. In short, for the world of FNAF, growing up in a family is a death sentence tomb, as much as any spring-lock suit could ever be.
Everything that you do is gonna get people more vulnerable than you killed by the FBI.
FNAF also thematizes surveillance security as violence. That the player generally plays a security guard who gets killed over and over by haunted machines is independent from what I'm talking about. In fact, the player security guard does relatively little securing. They mostly sit in an office and look at security cameras. For me, these cameras indicate the intersections of surveillance security and violence. Returning to William Afton as Capital owner, because he designed the camera layout, he knows where their blind spots are. He uses this knowledge to murder children. I say the cameras are violent in this situation because the security camera is a signifier of safety and surveillance. Its signification becomes a shield to hide Afton's violence. The pizzeria claims, how could we be responsible for those missing children when, if you check our tapes, there's no evidence for them being here? To asterisk that, I understand that within the lore... Oh my gosh, there's a sticker here. What the heck? Under my desk. When was that there? Okay. I understand that within the games, there are the newspapers in the first game that say that there was some masked guy, costume guy in a suit that was seen on the cameras taking people to the back rooms or whatever and was arrested. Which, may be true, but my understanding is nevertheless that this did not lead to William Afton's permanent arrest because he keeps at it after this point. The second place where security cameras feature prominently in FNAF is the Emily/Afton household. I don't understand the lore to know whose house is whose, but regardless, it is that the patriarch installed security cameras throughout the house, and especially in his children's rooms. This is the FNAF 4 house. The motivation for these cameras is declared to be to prevent child murder from happening again. And yet, the justification is in service of violating children's autonomy as individual beings. Surveillance security is violent in this situation because it commodifies living beings, children, one's own children. Furthermore, because surveillance alone cannot prevent child murder, additional security metrics must be incorporated. The patriarch needs total control of his children, his possessions, and so he brings in more and more potentially harmful technology. He brings in animatronic security, sound illusion discs, etc. Security is strictly the pretense for domination and dehumanization and depersonalization. Thus, the technologies of surveillance security are the master's tools. They are technologies that abusers use to abuse people. In the world that I live in, police use pretenses of security, of the need to secure capital, to justify their violence. An example is that ring cameras are accessed by police to hasten their practice of brutalizing black and brown bodies. The ring camera sells itself as a way to secure your packages, to make sure nobody steals them. Yet the police use ring cameras to monitor neighborhoods and streamline their operations. Surveillance security is a police tactic to help cops kill poor people, Kill black people, kill neurodivergent people, kill unhoused people. This is its ideological function.
There's not a lot of pain in the world that makes any sense. I wonder where all this pain comes from and this evil is, and where it lives.
I still don't like FNAF, but I keep coming back to it. I don't know why. It seems now that part of this is because FNAF has emerged, incidentally or not, as an evocative site for the systems of violence of the world that I live in to work themselves through dialectically. Everything is always saying something. I'm speaking here not just about FNAF. Nothing is impotent. Time does not march onwards only one way. People are not islands. No ending is final. This is where I find myself with the game right now. I feel as if everything was almost as if designed. It all seems so clear to me, and I know I am not alone in this sense, that my visions are not the only ones, that the visions swim too. See also a schizophrenic organizing logic. Since FNAF cannot be separated from child murder, this literally fuels the series and compels it into being. It needs dead kids to exist. I feel obliged to point people to aid any of the many global sites of ongoing child murder in the world that I live in. Donate to Palestinian children's charities and other children's charities, perhaps in the communities that you live in. It is ever the case, such as the Trevor Project and in queer children's communities, trans children's charities. It is ever the case that there are currently children who are alive, who may not be alive in the future. And there are also people, the IDF, the U.S. military, and the U.S. Supreme Court, for instance, who are dead set on killing children. If it is possible, I'd like to clarify that I'm not trying to do a think of the children bit. Non-children Palestinians, for example, are being murdered in equally high numbers. I'm focusing on children here because those are the terms FNAF gives me. That said, genocide and mass violence don't care about if someone is a child or not. I feel like children are probably fine enough on their own, as long as they aren't actively being targeted for murder by a $6 million arms industry, $6 trillion arms industry, or whatever, is what I'm saying. And so, to finally get out with it, to finally get out of this caveat rut, I'll continue my call to action, if that is what it may be. You can also volunteer at a charity in your neighborhood or elsewhere. It can be a children's one or not. Head over to the library, check out a book, talk to a librarian. Look into what's going on around you at the local level. Check out efforts to build community. Engage with those. Interact with the world that you live in. You are not alone. You have agency. The ending is not already written. Yeah, there probably aren't any mini games for you to clip through the walls of that unlock a secret item to use in another secret area to eventually make some virtual fictional souls be laid to rest or whatever. But you have a chance to make an impact. Give cake and give life. And eventually, when you and your loved ones die, know that you will still persist and continue on. Like Monty's hands, like Roxy's voice box, like Chica's eyes, like so many... Oh my gosh. Like Monty's hands, like Roxy's eyes, like Chica's voice box, like so many other things before you, and after you, and within you, we are always becoming something new. The world is not separate. The world is us. We are the world. We are nature. We are alive right now. Right then, we were, we will be again. We.